Okay. Right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. We're getting used to doing it this way. My name's Councillor Peter Southgate, and I am the chair. I will be chairing the meeting this evening. And for the benefit of anyone viewing this, let me introduce members of the Commission. We did have 415 viewers last time, so we can't expect all of them to know you, so I will introduce you. We are still awaiting my Vice Chair, Councillor Peter McCabe. In addition, we have Councillor Brenda Fraser, who chairs the Children and Young Persons panel. We have Councillor Ada Mundy, Chair of Sustainable Communities panel. Councillor Ben Butler. Well, Ben. Councillor Nick McLean. Councillor Ed Gretton.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillor Billy Christie. And Councillor Paul Kohler. And we have joining via audio Councillor Geraldine Stanford. In addition, we have our two co-opted members representing the education sector, Ros Gordner, hello Ros, and Mansour Ahmed. Good. Can I just check that we have
Peter?
Yeah.
Peter, it's Geraldine. I'm here now.
Yes, I've introduced you, Geraldine. So
oh, have you? Okay, cheers.
You're with us via the audio link. So it looks like apologies for lateness from Councillor McCabe. I hope you're about to join us soon. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none. The minutes of our last meeting, are we happy to accept those as an accurate record? If there is any dissent, please say. Okay, and I did check, I don't think there are any matters arising. Okay. I should also introduce Councillor Agatha Akagina, who is the cabinet member. I want Agatha for Safer Merton and policing matters. We've just got two main items on the agenda this evening. Peter, welcome. And
thank you, Chair. Sorry for being a few minutes late. I was delayed at work.
Okay. Particularly welcome to our commander of the 4-borough BCU and Chief Superintendent Liz Chappell. It is very good of you to take the time out from a very busy schedule, I imagine, currently. Can I invite you to give us a report on, partly in response to the questions we put you, but I'm sure you will also want to cover events on Clapham Common just last weekend, which you covered in a letter to us, which I think we received yesterday, didn't we? And then we'll take questions and any points people want to raise on the stats. Chief Superintendent, the floor is yours. We're listening.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening to everybody this evening and everybody. So my name is Liz Chapman, Policing Commander for the 4-borough include. Very pleased. My aim is to make a few general comments, and then I'm happy to cover the statistics in the pack, if that can be brought up for me, and then turn to the questions in advance. But Chair, exactly start this evening by saying, acknowledging what an incredibly difficult week to 10 days it's been for all of us, and of course primarily and my personal thoughts as thoughts of all of ours go out to that family today. So the events on Clapham Common, as you know, are subject now to an HMIC review, and I think that's welcomed by all parties. It's a situation that nobody would have wanted. Nobody would have wanted what started off as a vigil, very full heartfelt tribute for, you know, at least 6 hours on Saturday. Nobody would have wanted it to end that way. So we all welcome that review. You'll understand that I won't be answering direct questions on the police handling of that particular incident on Clapham Common, as it is subject to that review. But I will obviously provide any further information to this group that I can on. We obviously have come together as a policing team now to make a very renewed effort on, firstly, re-establishing trust and confidence in our police officers in the area, but also to look at revisiting what we're doing on the topics of violence against women and girls, and seeing if there's any more we can do. So there's a very general comment, and I know that I will be getting further questions on that later, and I'm happy to answer those where I can. In terms of...
Sorry, can I just ask everybody to put themselves on mute? I think it might just help improve the consistency of the signal from the borough commander. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, please go ahead, Liz.
Peter?
Okay, I think one of the councillors perhaps is not on mute yet, but I'll continue. So the other general comments that I wanted to make is when we spoke previously, some of us, we were in a very difficult place from a policing resilience perspective in terms of the number of officers that we had either ill with COVID, unfortunately, or off isolating. I'm very happy to say that now our absence rate is around 4%, so actually very low. The Met itself has got a 5% absence rate, and we're doing better than that. What that means is that you'll see more officers out on the street again, which is very happy news for all of us. We have, of course, had a number of officers who've been helping with the protests in central London, and we've had a number of officers who've been helping Kent Police with their inquiries. But otherwise, the vast majority of your officers are now returned to their normal positions and not needed to backfill other rows at the moment. The other area of focus, as you'd expect, has been looking at what we're doing from an easing of lockdown perspective. As you're aware from the roadmap set out by the government, there's various staged dates for that, and we've been looking at how those affect us in policing. And that ranges from activity at the moment really heavily centred around schools. Obviously, the schools went back on March the 8th, and we want to make sure that the children are safe, and so we're working with the schools officers to achieve that. The second phase of the work that we're doing is very much looking at, in those intervening periods between previous lockdown periods, where was there violence, and putting our police officers and staff into targeted positions to try and prevent and mitigate any return of violence in those areas. So we've been enjoying a very happy period of, in most cases, a reduction in crime in our area, and we want that to carry on. The other area of focus, of course, particularly as people start to get out and about, when we look at the April the 12th date and also June, is looking at our green spaces and making sure that we don't have a heavy amount of antisocial behaviour. It's those types of crimes that we know affect people very deeply in their communities. But overall, just returning to where I started, we want to increase our neighbourhood visibility and just really be out in the community listening to people. I've been very pleased to receive quite a number of messages of support from the community and from partners, which has really helped my officers to feel confident that they're doing the right thing. As you know, they come to work every day to help others. And despite the extremely difficult scenes that nobody would have wanted to see on Clapham Common, that's the thought I want to leave you with, is that the police officers are there for you. We need to maintain those working relationships so that people feel free always to ask police officers for help where they need it. So those are the opening comments that I was going to make. Is it a good time to make a few comments on the pack and then turn to the questions?
Yes, certainly. Do carry on with that part of it.
Is it going to be displayed on the screen? or not? Chair?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Liz. Did you say you wanted to share it on the screen?
Yes, I asked whether you wanted to. I'm happy to read from the hard copy pack that I've got, but I didn't know whether you wanted to put it up so that people could view it.
Chair, would you prefer it shared on screen?
Rosie, if you've got it ready, yes. Otherwise, we'll work with hard copy.
Okay, well, let me start talking in any case. So,
for people watching, if it's on the screen.
yes.
True. Yes, if you can get it on the screen then, Rosie.
Okay, so hopefully people can see that now. So the initial slides that you've got, and I think scroll down to the one that covers Merton 3 in. So the pack takes people through the context for the crime numbers in firstly the Met whole, then as a 4-borough area, and then as Merton. There are a number of points that I'd like to bring to your attention on the Merton page, which is the one of interest to us today. I think the other statistics are useful. So it's the slide before that. I think the other statistics are useful because they provide that comparator about how Merton is doing in comparison to other boroughs. So as you'll see, happily, under the offences percentage change, there's been a reduction in most of the major crime types. The areas where there hasn't been a reduction include antisocial behaviour, which typically includes COVID calls, and so isn't the antisocial behaviour that we would normally talk about, and also bicycle theft and domestic abuse. And we will, I know, come to talk about domestic abuse later. So on the slide that is being shared at the screen, what you have there is the response times. So these are, for the benefit of people listening, these are our response cards who respond to the 999 calls. And what we do is we measure, we have a time of 15 minutes to get to the most important calls, and we measure how often we meet that target. And as you can see from the data, we have a very strong rate of meeting that. So in the 80% at the moment, and it's actually on average an improving picture. And one of the questions that we'll come to later is around whether the move to Wimbledon police station and the consolidation of our resources there has affected things. And you'll see from this data that it hasn't. What we've also got information on, which might be of interest to the group, is we've started looking at what our average time getting there is. And that also has got very favourable results. So the antisocial behaviour is on the next slide. And you'll see that the levels of antisocial behaviour remain high. As I've said, it's a little bit of a unusual period at the moment with the antisocial behaviour calls. And indeed, on the next slide, it shows the COVID summary, which is the overall position in this period. The next batch of slides deal with Merton search, stop and search volume. And they show there the number of stop and searches that are carried out in Merton as compared to other boroughs. You'll see that it's at the lower end. So that can be both a good thing or a less good thing, depending on your view of stop and search. I would argue that given the amount of offences that we have in the Merton area, that is a proportionate number of stops. But again, very happy to take questions on that. And then I think we get into the set of slides underneath that on the search volume by demographic. So this is where we look at both ethnicity of the people that we stop and also the age of the people that we stop. And I think various inferences can be drawn from that. It's fair to say that this is an area that's going to be has received over the last few years and will continue to receive very significant scrutiny, and rightly so. And the stop and search monitoring groups do a great job of that. And now they're able to look at the body worn footage again. I think that does help them a lot. What we want to do is we want to be in a position where any disproportionality, particularly in terms of ethnicity, can be explained with an evidence rationale about why those stops have taken place. And many of you watching and listening will be familiar with the Mayor's Action Plan, which sets out some of the work that's going to be taking place in this area, including at the moment the pilot scheme with our roads traffic officers of noting the ethnicity of people driving cars that are stopped. So we watch that area with interest. We have some sickness data which was asked for, and so we've included that in the pack. Take from that what you will, but as I've made comments in my opener, I feel that we're in a very resilient place at the moment. Indeed, this last 12 months has been a period where police officers have known that their skills are really important in the community, and sickness levels have actually been very low. So those are the last few slides in the pack, and I'm happy to take questions on them. Chair, would you like me to pause there and take questions so far, or move on to the pre-submitted questions?
I think we'll take questions there on the stats, and perhaps I could ask you, if I may, if I take your two charts there, demographics and positive outcome, and I percentage one by the other, I hope this is a valid thing to do. I find that white stops 26% result in a positive outcome, with black 24%, Asian 21%, others 25%. I'm taking those as being within the, the bounds statistically, that they are not significant differences between the different categories, which I think is quite an important point to understand. Is my interpretation correct there?
Yes, it is. Yes, we that is something that we look at all the time, and we haven't found any significant difference in that in our area.
Good, thank you. And by age, I mean, I won't labour the point, but with the exception perhaps of the 15 to 9, the younger groups less likely to produce a positive outcome, but otherwise the numbers look very similar. So, yeah.
Yeah. You'll be aware of some of the debate in this area around whether we stop just based on the cannabis, and it's something that's heavily debated. But the point of it is we want officers to use different types of intelligence when they're deciding whether to stop people, rather than just using what they see in front of them. We want them to use different types of intelligence, and actually. One of the things we're doing in our area, which is being really well received, is we are passing on information about young people that we've stopped to our partner agents, because see it from the stop and search, and also when we look at who are some of our perpetrators of crime in the area, there is quite a young demographic, and it's not specific to London, to Merton, it's London generally, and we are heavily investing in diverting young people away from crime. So anything that we can do to help us do that is going to be taken forward.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just unmuting myself. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you and your team for all the hard work you do, just to start us off there. But I have a couple of questions on the pack here, and you may not be able to answer here, as they're kind of mainly to do with the statistics. My focus to begin with is definitely the Merton search volume by demographic. Maybe I'm missing something here in the pack, but it would be useful for us actually to see, maybe in future, the search volume as a proportion of the demographic population of the area, because I think what's missing from here, unless someone says to me it's on this page here, I'd be glad to see it, that you've got your numbers here, but so you got white around 2,000, black around 1,400, but the proportion of black ethnic population in Merton is around 10%, and this is a much more than 10% as a proportion here. So it'd be useful for us to see that maybe in future as a proportion. My second question is to do with age. There is quite a worrying number, as you mentioned, of young people being stopped and searched there. I was wondering if you, I mean, maybe it's a kind of glitch in the figures here, but it says one person under 10 years old is being stopped and searched. Is that right? And also, I'm glad to hear that, you know, about the support networks that you kind of put young people onto after these searches. That's good to hear. But I'm also just wondering about the actual approach of the stop and search when you see that they are children, and if there's anything different that you that happens in those circumstances. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Butler. So let me take those questions in turn. So the information that we've got that would help us understand the stop and searches at the moment is based on the old census data. So that's going back 10 years now. So as you'll be aware, there are new census packs out at the moment. And so we hope that's going to give us more insight. As it is, what we can do at the moment is we can check, spot check different cases and see what that tells us. And what it's told us when we've looked at this in the recent past is that there is the normal residential population of Merton, and then there is the population that comes in primarily for education, but sometimes for other purposes. And that really skews the available street population to stop and search. So that we're hopeful that after the census, which includes some broader questions about how people are in different areas, it is going to really help us provide that data. So we do provide you with what we have at the moment. And frustratingly, we know that perhaps the position is slightly skewed. The under 10 case, I don't have a comment on, because I don't know what that case is. What I would say is that it's always a sad shock to me that there are so many young people involved in crime. And indeed, when we look at some of our recent perpetrators and suspects for crime, they're terribly young. It's very sad. And we read about in the newspapers the recent case of a 12-year-old being involved in a violent altercation, although not in our area. So in terms of the approach, the third part of your question, absolutely we do change our approach. So the only difficulty I'd say that we have in practical terms is that children would typically run away, well, not typically, would often run away from us. And that can be through several reasons. And we know that, a police officer in uniform is something that does cause anxiety. And so we do have that in mind. And where we're able to use local neighbourhood officers who would typically know which school the children came from, we would look to kind of seek to build that connection with the children first in the first part of that stop and try and build their trust, and certainly spend a lot more time explaining to them what we were doing and why, which is, makes it a bit more accessible for a child. Thank you.
We come to Councillor McCabe, then I'll come to Councillor Coe afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Elizabeth whether you record and have the ability to record when you stop and search vulnerable adults, and what arrangements do you make for ensuring that they are treated properly and are recognised as such?
It's a very good question. We so easily fall into talking about children and forget all of the excellent work that goes on for safeguarding adults as well. Our officers actually get a lot of continued professional development on vulnerable adults. Typically, we start by talking to them about adults with mental health issues, which is the most prevalent issue that we come across on the streets at the moment in up to 20% of cases. But then we do move on to talk about other types of vulnerability as well. We don't have a similar programme in place for the adults as we do with the children, but that is something we could consider. The difficulty that we've got at the moment is because of the volume of stops, we don't want to overwhelm our partners, and we also want both them and us to be able to pick out the cases that have got the most risk. But what the officers do is where they deal with an incident that involves a vulnerable adult, they will go back to the station or on their device and they will fill in an additional form that records the safeguarding concerns, which is a separate form to the one that records the incident details. Thank you.
And Councillor Kohler.
Thank you. Two questions. Liz, you told us at a previous meeting how you changed the KPI on stop and search. I wonder perhaps if you could refresh our memories, and for those listening, what you did to that KPI and whether that's had effect on the quality or quantity of stop and search. And secondly, if you could tell us anything about whether these figures include section 60 stop and searches. Are they all amalgamated, or would the figures look very different if we were looking at section 60 stop and searches as opposed to the normal routine stop and searches? Thank you.
So yes, I remember our discussion about the KPIs. At the time that we spoke, the BCU had this performance measure that was simply increasing the number of stop and searches that were done. And we all agreed at that meeting, I know, that that was perhaps an unfortunate KPI to have, because it's a lot more nuanced and complex than that. So what we have at the moment in terms of the things that we're measuring ourselves on, there's 5 key areas. I'll mention them briefly because some are more relevant than others. So the first one is having engaged and healthy people. So that's talking about our people, so that they're well equipped to provide a service to the public. The second one is increasing public confidence, never more important at the moment. And when, of course, we look at the statistics for public attitude and public confidence, they've been on a decline, and we want to reverse that decline, particularly locally. The third area is increasing victim satisfaction, and we're doing some very good work to do that. Again, that's measured by monthly surveys, so we get some really good data on how we're doing on different elements of that. The fourth one is preventing and reducing violent crime. And the fifth one is improving our detection rates, so the amount of cases that we solve in priority areas, which include robbery, domestic abuse, rape, and hate crime. Turning to the second part of your question, yes, they would include the section 60 searches. Bob has actually pulled out some data for me on this because I didn't have it to hand. So he lets me know there were 137 searches carried out under section 60 in the last 12 months out of just over 5,000 stop and searches. So 11 section 60s authorised for areas that include Merton. So some of those section 60s would have been primarily to cover incidents in Wandsworth, but of course, being so close together, they would come over into our area here.
Councillor Fraser next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that comprehensive report. But I have 2 questions, please. I think they're going to be short. One is about people who stray across borders to commit crime. So they come to Merton, but they belong to another borough. How do you follow that up so that we don't have them keep returning? And, I don't know how you work with other people, so I'm just wanting to know. And also vulnerable adults or vulnerable people were mentioned just now, but there's also mental health. And how do you differentiate and how do you cope with that? Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of people who make crime in more than one place in London, as you'd expect, that happens all the time. So and on all crime types. So examples of crime types where that would happen are burglary, for example, or other acquisitive crimes where people might travel to areas where there are high numbers of people that might be available for them to commit crime against. Also things like county lines, drug work. So so we have the intelligence systems in place that work across London. So we have a whole intelligence division who work on collecting information from across London and looking to see where the themes are. And that's really helped us, for example, in cases of sexual assaults or other cases where perhaps there's been a particular method or way of committing that crime, and it helps us make those connections. So we have the right systems in place. We also have really strong working relationships with all of our counterpart roles in the different policing areas. So I have a peer group of 11 other people, 11 other BCU commanders, and we meet very regularly to discuss issues in our area. And then all of my teams have similar meetings where they meet with their counterparts. So Bob on the call would talk to the neighbouring boroughs about neighbourhood issues. Superintendent Andy Wadey, who's on the call as well, would join a monthly meeting with other investigations leads across the Met to share best practice. Turning to the second part of your question on vulnerability and mental health, our public protection team in the BCU work really closely with our partner agencies on these issues. Mental health is something that we've got an increasing awareness of, and we're helped by our partner agencies in a lot of work that we do. We believe that mental health is relevant for a significant proportion of the work that we do, and albeit that there are other agencies who are often placed to provide the support that person needs, we know that we're very often there at that first point that somebody needs help. And so we're trialing lots of different things to help us deal most effectively with those issues as soon as possible. So things like taking a mental health nurse out with us on shifts, things like having a hotline set up where our officers on the street can get that immediate medical information or advice in the moment where they're dealing with something. We also have a group of trained negotiators who are really skilled at using different communication techniques that will be effective with people in different situations. So there's a variety of things that we do, and I'm really pleased that both for our own officers and for the people that we interact with, it's something that's talked about a lot more often now.
Thank you very much.
Let me, Councillor Mundy, I'm looking, yes, you had a question?
I did, but Liz did answer it in her remarks. But you know, I've got another one, as you would probably expect. I was just really interested in two layers, and I appreciate if you can't answer it now as well. I should have probably gave you a bit more foresight of that. One is actually digging a level down in the figures to comparing both Mitcham and Wimbledon in terms of the varying differences in or particularly think about the economic challenge as well. And also, you know, a lot of the crime which has gone down, thankfully, partly due to lockdown, is ultimately economic driven. And I'd be interested to understand from your intelligence, where you can share it, you know, that those individuals still need to make money somehow. What's happened? Do we know how that has been shaping up? And sorry, the third one, while I'm on the roll, you talked about averages on your response times. Do you have additional statistics in terms of the variance and also the banded modal range? Just be interested. Again, of course, you probably won't have them to hand.
Okay. Let me take some parts of your question, and then I might bring Bob in for the more local perspective on the comparison within the borough. He will have better information on that than me. The economic challenge we know is very real, and we're all bracing ourselves, aren't we, for a period of uncertainty followed by austerity. We know that crime would typically rise in higher deprivation areas with denser housing. So we're alert to that, and we're also, so we want to get the balance from a policing perspective with being in the right areas, but also making sure that populations who might live in those areas don't feel over-policed. In terms of how that manifests itself in crime types, So we have obviously done a lot of work on drug markets in the recent months, and what we found to be the most effective way of using our resources during lockdown, because that available street population has been lower, is to go after the organised criminal groups and the county lines type activity. And you may have seen a release by the Met, I think it was about 3 weeks ago now, the Commissioner in a press statement on Operocci, which is looking at those county lines, some of which have come into our area. And the Commissioner actually did a piece of filming from Wimbledon Police Station on that. And the statistics on that showed that the operation's been running since 2017, and there've been over 1,000 charges across London. So, and the work has been intensifying recently, and we've had huge successes on that. So I'd encourage you to refer to that press release for the detail of it. And I think we haven't seen the worst of the effects of the economic deprivation, because during this period, because of the community cohesion that we've got, plus the government support and the additional government support that was in place, there's actually been reasonable access to people to benefits, food banks, furlough, all of those kind of things. So I actually think that we'll start to see the effects towards the autumn when some of those schemes fall away. So those are the general comments I want to make. I will come back to in a minute your question on the modal times for response, because I think I have those, so I will just try and find them. In the meantime, Bob, are you able to make any comments on the local context in Merton?
Thank you for that, boss. Hang on, let me just bring up a camera as well. No, sorry, you can't have a camera. If I can just start before I do anything else with commenting on the under 10-year-old. I've just found the report. It's a 3-year-old who was apparently driving a BMW 1 Series. Bearing in mind, it looks like it's a typo, and it's where somebody was saying somebody's about 30 years old and was stopped in a 1 Series BMW. My 3-year-old, I really wouldn't let drive a car. So that is a typing error. That's not to say we don't only do stop and searches for people who are under 10, but there needs to be some quite strong grounds, and that hasn't happened in the last 12 months. If I can cover about the difference in stop and searches, we don't have specific information about exactly where our directed stop and searches are. What I can say is that for the things like the Section 60s, they're in specific wards and specific areas. As the boss just referred, sometimes the Section 60s will cover from Wandsworth, sometimes we get them in from where something's happened on the border with Croydon, and that means that we'll do a lot more stop and searches in the areas around where we think there's most likely to be the crime areas and the crime hotspots. So we do a significant number more stop and searches in the Mitcham area, but I can't give you specific figures about that. What I can also say, however, is that while certain teams will be monitoring and will be working in the Mitcham areas, we do also have other teams, and they will cover all of the borough, so they will be out doing stop and searches and speaking to people across the whole of the borough, not just in the Mitcham area. My neighbourhood teams are out all day, every day, and they're doing a few stop and searches in various places. And we've got some robbery problems in places like Wimbledon Town Centre that we're targeting and looking at how we can deal with, aside from the main issues that we have, as the boss has said, about some organised groups in the Mitcham areas.
Thank you, Bob. So if I come back in then to finish off the question, I don't have Merton specific data. What I do have is BCU level data. I believe we should be able to get it for Merton in the future though. So what that shows me is that our average attendance time in February was 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes, and that was the same in January and the same in December. So around 10 minutes to those calls that we need to get to within 15. And then in terms of the other calls, the S calls, we have about 70% of those in target. So we'll look and see whether we can get that on a Merton basis. But I think we're well within target for those most important calls. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Let me come to Mansour Ahmed now, please. Mansour.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, BCU Commander, for your detailed report. We really appreciate your teamwork. I have got a question. It's about how effective is your neighborhood policy plan with dedicated officer in boroughs in tackling low-level crime affecting Martin's people in day-to-day basis? Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So thank you for that question, and thank you very much for those supportive comments. They're very much appreciated. Neighbourhood policing, as I said when we last met, is really important to me. I believe that if we have good neighbourhood officers in local areas getting to know the communities that they police, that will provide reassurance to the communities, and it will mean that crimes can be dealt with quickly and effectively, and we can work with other partners to problem solve. So it's a hugely important area. So what I've been doing, as I promised before, over the last few months is moving resources into the neighbourhood area. And Bob in Merton has very few vacancies. He has almost all of the officers that he's supposed to have at the moment. And I'm going to continue focus to make sure that that doesn't fall away. So in terms of what they concentrate on, it's actually under review at the moment. And there was a thought at one point that because violence is such an important thing to concentrate on, then everybody should, all of the neighbourhood resource should be focused on violence. And we were one of the areas that were saying, well, violence, of course, is very harmful. It's a high risk area of crime that needs to be addressed. But that's not the only thing that resonates with local communities. I mean, very happily, as we know, Merton's an extremely safe borough. So the number of people who are actually affected by violence in our area is very small. So we also want to make sure that we provide a policing resource for the things that people see every day. So the antisocial behaviour, the graffiti, and those types of things that contribute to how safe a person feels in their local area, as well as how safe they actually are. So we said in the feedback that we wanted to make sure that all of the ward panels that are set up to collect the community views also still had scope to set local priorities alongside their local policing teams. And we know that at the moment, the priorities that Bob's put in place do include the high harm areas, but they also include, I think you have a visitor behind you, but they also include an antisocial behaviour priority as well. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. And Councillor McCabe, then we'll return to the previously submitted questions. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And I've got a question that kind of draws a few things that the BCU commander has touched on. The first is intelligence, second is stop and search, and the third is maintaining community support. And my question is, if you have intelligence that leads you to stop and search an individual, that clearly is important work to be done. But if that happens repeatedly, then is there a system in place to review the original intelligence? Because if the stop and search doesn't produce any kind of positive outcome in terms of detecting a crime, there comes a point, if somebody has been repeatedly stopped and searched every time they are out and about, that you start to lose community support because it becomes harassment, or it can be perceived as harassment. So what procedures are there in place? If, for example, somebody has been stopped and searched on 10 occasions, with kind of the suggestion being made by officers that it involves, then what procedures are in place to address the issue of, is it possible we got this wrong in the first place and that the intelligence was faulty? Or do you continue with the same procedures and the same stop and searches to the point where people in the community start to feel that people are being put upon?
It's a great question. It's It's actually a little complicated to answer those, so bear with me while I just take us through my thoughts on it. So when we talk about intelligence, when we think about that practically, that can come to us in different ways. So, for example, there might have been an incident that's just happened on the street. Perhaps somebody's had their mobile phone stolen or something like that. And that victim will give a description of the person or people that committed that offence. So that's one type of intelligence. And there wouldn't then be any consideration over whether the person, if we saw somebody matching the description, whether that person had been stopped before, because it's very much in the moment directed intelligence. We then have another category of intelligence that's mainly vehicle based. So this is where perhaps a car has been involved in drug dealing, for example, and we would then, of course, as you'd expect us to, make a record of that number plate. Now, that is one of the types of situations where I can see that there could be a risk of repeated stopping of the occupants of a particular car. So what we're doing now is making sure that, so every time that car is stopped, what the officers have to do is record the outcome. And then it will be reviewed by our intelligence analysis to decide whether that will come off. So that's the vehicle stop. The third area is more complex, and that's where we're looking at a crime profile in an area. And this is where we're saying to officers that they need to have really strong grounds before they do the stop that they're doing, which is when I was referring to not cannabis only, for example, in that debate that's ongoing. Sometimes we do recognise, so our officers on the street do recognise the people that they might decide to stop. But in many cases, particularly with our response officers, who are the ones that answer the 999 calls, they won't know until they go and have that interaction with the person what that person's name is. So in that moment, there's very little they can do about it. But yes, they do go back and they do, we would look at whether we are doing anything close to harassment. And indeed, we have been looked at as an organisation and scrutinised in this regard. You may recall the Information Commissioner's work on the gangs matrix, for example, which made it very clear to us that we needed to review that on a more regular basis, and where somebody should come off the gangs matrix, then that happened. If you recall, one of the difficulties that we'd had is where a person had been involved in crimes as a victim and also involved in crimes as a perpetrator, and how we kept that demarcation really clear. So I think we are getting better at that. We don't want people, as I said before, to feel over-policed in their area. And where we do have somebody who is offending on a repeated basis, there will have been a multi-agency meeting to decide how best to address that, both from an enforcement perspective and a support perspective for that person. Thank you.
Peter, Billy had his hand up.
Yes, Christy, sorry.
Thank you, Agatha. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the Borough Commander for the presentation as well. My question is just about the, so it's about the chart that you've got on the handouts, which shows the stop and search by reason in the borough. And I think from some of the later charts, it looks like there's a success or a positive outcome rate of around 24%. For all stop and searches in the borough. But if we look at this chart that shows the stop and search by reason, it's clear that the most common reason for stopping and searching someone is based on a drugs or suspicion of a drugs offence. And so I'm interested to know if that 24% kind of success or positive outcome rate is applicable across all the reasons here for stopping and searching someone, or if the success rate is higher in relation to drugs offences or even lower. Or I'm just interested to know how that plays out compared to the reasons for stopping and searching someone.
Yes, no, it's a good question, and it's a question that I'd like to answer with data that I don't have to hand, unfortunately, that level of detail. I think that that's a valid question. I mean, typically the two main things that we would expect to find based on the intelligence we've got when we stop and search somebody is either drugs or weapons. Those are the main categories, and there are obviously specific legislation to deal with looking for those things. And so I think the data would be quite general in terms of those things. And I would guess, although it's very much a guess, and I want to see the data, that we would find a higher proportion of drugs. And of course, the amount of drugs that you find is can really make a crime vary, from a bit of possession to perhaps somebody who's involved in supply. But what I do think is that it would be a really good question to pass to the Stop and Search Community Monitoring Group for them to have a look at and really get into the detail of that data.
Councillor Gretton, please.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. Just wanted to ask about the Section 60 stop and search processes. How often has that process been utilised in Merton? Has it been utilised quite a lot? And what are your findings? Is it, what sort of circumstances is it generally used for in Wimbledon and Mitcham? This is the process where you don't need a reasonable grounds to stop someone, but you have some specific intelligence, I guess, and you have a period of up to 15 hours where you might utilise that process. So are you able to give us any update on how that sort of panned out on the ground, and what any learnings might be? Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So I can add to the previous answer I gave. So that was where we talked about the fact there were 137 searches out of just over 5,000 that were done under a Section 60. So there have been 11 Section 60s that have been authorised for where they might include part of Merton. So those won't all be Merton specific. And they're typically put in place where there's been some violence, and perhaps it's been between gangs, although that's not always the case. And we fear that there might be repercussions in the area, and a Section 60 would be put in place. But as you can see from that number, it's just not something, it's not a piece of legislation that's often used in Merton at all. Happily, it's just not needed.
And Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a comment, actually, just to thank the Borough Commander for all your comprehensive answers tonight, and also add my thanks to you and your team for all you do. And also really welcome your focus on the Safer Neighbourhood teams. I know that I'm certainly blessed in Cannon Hill, the ward I represent, with our team. So yeah, look, just thank you very much for the report tonight.
Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I can echo that. And I have to say, I'm very impressed, if I may say so, Liz, with, I know you were part of the gradual entry and all that, but impressive command of the data and all the facts. I'm just looking through at the list of questions we submitted. I think you've answered a number of them. The areas perhaps we haven't touched on so much. Domestic violence. I don't know whether you're able to stay when we come to the Safer Merton element, because they will be talking about domestic violence too, and we could take the two together, or would you prefer to take that now?
Yes, I know we've got Zoe on the call as well, so we can deal with that then. Shall I scan through the questions and answer any that we haven't?
Please do that.
I'll deal with it quickly, so to enable us to go on. So the future of Wimbledon Police Station was one of the questions put, and as members and others may recall, this is where we brought together our response teams into that one area to cover the east side of the BCU. And we did that to make the best use of Wimbledon Police Station, which is a fantastic facility, and also to deepen team working in the area. And as you'll see from the statistics on the I-grade calls that were included in the pack, the times that we've got to calls have not suffered at all. So I would say that has been a success. We haven't had confirmation from MOPAC yet that we're keeping Wimbledon, but I very, very much anticipate that will be the case. I can't see why it wouldn't. We've covered Section 60 and also covered community policing. We haven't talked about the role of the police enforcing COVID regulations. I'm happy to take questions on that. As you would expect, since the roadmap to lockdown easing has been put out, we've been using very much more of the approach where we're concentrating on larger gatherings only. We believe that the community in Merton has been incredibly just supportive, incredibly sensible, really been driven by the science. And so we're just very much still working with the community on that. There was a question asked about dog theft, which I know has been of concern to the community recently. I'm happy to look at the statistics for that, but I can tell you that there have been an extremely small number of dog thefts recorded. And indeed, Bob has looked at the detail of those, and it's single figures for our area for the year. So I think it's one of those things that is a very emotive subject, and has been reported in the press, included in the national press, but we're confident that it's not a significant issue in our area. In terms of planned and actual staff numbers, we have around 1,550 officers and staff at the moment, and we're hoping that will grow soon. We have volunteers as well, so we have our special constables, and we'll be looking to increase those numbers. So if anyone listening on the call fancies becoming a special constable and working alongside us, or indeed volunteering in any other capacity, then do let me know. We're very pleased to speak to you about that. We've covered sickness rates, we've covered response times, and we've talked a little bit, and I think we'll come on to this in domestic abuse, about how people are coping with lockdown. So we've touched on mental health, and I do think it's important we come back to domestic abuse. So I think that does cover all of the questions that were submitted in advance, Chair.
The one you haven't covered is what help can we as councillors provide you, and indeed as a councillor, as a council, to the work you're trying to do?
No, you're right. I did skip over that. Yes, well, you've been so supportive. I do thank you for the comments, and I also welcome the scrutiny. So we do want to improve our service to you. We will, as soon as COVID regulations allow, be coming out into the community a lot more, doing road shows to school children and community members to explain the type of work that we're doing. So I would just say, I've actually had a few messages from people whose children might want to be police officers in the future. So anybody like that who's just interested in policing, please do send them our way, because we like nothing more than to show people how the blue lights work and kind of boast about our exciting jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless we have further questions, I think after an hour we really should give the Chief Superintendent a break. Okay, I'm going to take Ed, and then I'm going to take Paul. Make them please.
Yeah, just to emphasise again on community police, I know we touched on it, but it really is such an important issue that to have that visible presence. So it's not just about engaging with all the different groups in our communities and all the different institutions and resident associations and things like that, but also actually just being visibly out and about. For example, we've got Gap Road, Durnsford Road, Plough Lane, all the flats there. There's an awful lot of antisocial behaviour happening, a lot of afternoons or evenings in the flats around Plough Lane, and also in the two co-ops on Durnsford Road and Haydens Road. There's a lot of theft as well, and sometimes robbery and this type of thing. So I think all the community there feels very strongly that just having an officer or a car there and just being visible once or twice a week in the afternoon and the evenings is such a big, it has such a big impact and a positive impact, and it really acts as a very strong deterrent. So anything you can do to do that for the purposes of community policing, I think would be very much appreciated.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree, and we'll be endeavouring to do that. Yep.
Thank you very much.
And Councillor Kohler? Thank you.
Just 2 points. One a process, one for the future, and one on the sad case of Sarah Everard and the vigil. On a process point, some of the questions I submitted were quite detailed, and in the past we've had written responses, and the point of that is we can then use those to pivot off on issues. So we've lacked the detail now, and I'm not expecting you to give it now, but I think for the future it would be useful to have written answers to these questions so that we can use that on which to pivot into questions supplementaries. So that's just a point in passing I'd like you to consider. With regard to of course, the terrible death of Sarah Everard and the vigil, women, girls in the borough across the country, of course, are alarmed and scared. I don't want to press you. I know there's an inquiry. I don't want to press you on that now. I see why you can't speak on that. But if you can tell us one thing, the time frame, what is the time frame for that inquiry? Do you know? And in the interregnum, when we haven't got, we don't have some answers to the questions that must be asked, what would you say to the women and girls, particularly in the borough, who are clearly alarmed by what they saw, both the preceding and at the end of the vigil?
Yes, of course. So let me take those points. So written responses, yes, a very good point, and happy to endeavour to do that going forward. Time frame for the review, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, and I'm not sure whether it's been disclosed. I haven't seen it disclosed publicly, and it hasn't been disclosed to me. But that's certainly something I can keep people up to date on as soon as I know. In terms of violence against women and girls and what I want to say to people following Clapham, I mean, I don't know if anyone uses social media, but I tried on Sunday morning to put out a tweet to acknowledge that we were in a very difficult position and that now we would look to be rebuilding trust. I do believe that at Clapham Common, it was a really optically terrible situation to be in, but it was a very small section of what otherwise was a very, very lovely, socially distanced vigil for Sarah, lasting over a number of hours. So we have, a lot of introspection going on about the fact that a police officer has been accused of this crime and will stand trial for that in October, as we know. And it's actually very devastating to officers that they might now be out on the streets and wouldn't be trusted by people, very importantly, women and girls who we want at the slightest sense of concern on their part about any situation they may be in, to look to us as trusted people to help them. And so what we're putting into place is we've started a social media campaign. We're working really hard with third sector organisations and community influencers to show the types of things that we're involved in and that we can be trusted. We'll also, with these easing of lockdown plans, particularly around the nighttime economy, be really sensitive and really think deeply about how we can make sure that women who are going to be using the nighttime economy feel safer. So, for example, posting officers outside clubs, working with voluntary organisations who use female participants to help people. So, and that is an area where we'd welcome any support or ideas, because it's absolutely essential that people ask us for help where they need it.
Aidan, let me bring you in, and then we're going to move on to the next section.
Thank you, Chair. Liz, just following back up on your points about safety in the public realm, but also about partnership working. Obviously, you've outlined what you're doing and to introduce more high visibility for confidence, which is absolutely fantastic. Just thinking about our role and the work that we do, and with colleagues, especially the designing out crime aspect, what further efforts have been or will be over the next, say, year or two to take the lessons from COVID, the positives, learn from the negatives, use the data we've got, and especially around the public space, especially around, bit more crimes where, you're walking home at night, you need high visibility areas. What steps have been taken moving forward to address those and design that out?
It's very much a partnership effort, because a number of the issues that you've raised there are within the remit of the council. And I know that, for example, Lambeth Council has already responded very quickly and put in additional lighting. We do, as you know, have specialist designing out crime officers who are working on a number of different projects. And you're absolutely right, this is absolutely going to become an additional focus for those roles. You know, we've typically gone along thinking about those types of issues from, say, a counter-terrorism perspective. And we now are going to, you know, they'll obviously be adding this to their portfolio. But I know there's significant work going on in the councils via their community safety groups on these issues as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to the next report from Safer Merton. Before I do so, I think I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say you do certainly have our sympathy at the moment in a very difficult job, and you have our support. We're trying to enforce restraints upon us that we're not used to. We regard it as a very basic freedom to be able to protest and to assemble for those purposes. So it's you know, it's a no-win. I would not wish your job right now, anything in the world. So
yeah, no, thank you, Chair. And I'm really
doing it so well.
Yeah, pleased from a public perspective that from the 29th of March, such gatherings will be able to take place in a COVID secure way again. So I think that's a happy development, but thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Good, let me bring in Kath James now, and Zoe, and lots of people, but I don't.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, my
there you are. There you are.
My camera is not working on this laptop, so I'm afraid it's by voice only. We put together a short presentation to cover the topics that you asked us to have a look at, specifically around domestic violence and indeed antisocial behaviour. So I'm going to hand over to Kelly and Zoe, who are going to take you through those slides and some of the data this evening, but obviously we'd be very happy to pick up any questions that members have once we finish that presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us to come along to talk to you. As already has been said, the picture of crime in Merton has changed quite significantly over the last 12 months, particularly in relation to the lockdown and COVID. But as requested, we're going to be talking about domestic violence and antisocial behaviour. So just as a brief overview, we'll take you through the trend data for domestic violence for the last 3 years so that you can see what the pattern has been on the borough. And give
Kelly, Kelly, don't be shy. Speak up a bit.
Sorry, it must be the microphone. I'll hold it up
that's
here.
Better. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. And to give you an update on some of the domestic violence work that's been going on in the borough over the last 12 months, whilst then taking you through as to what we plan going forward, particularly as lockdown starts to ease, some of the work that we have planned and ready to go on the borough. We'll then take you through the ASB complaints to the Safer Merton team for the last 3 years, and some of the work for the Safer Merton team around antisocial behaviour. You've already seen a chart from the police around ASB complaints to the police, but we've got that there as by means of comparison to what the team was seeing. And then again, like with the domestic violence work, take you through an update on some of the work that's been carried out over the last 12 months and the future ASB plans. So I'm going to take you through the first slide and hand over to Zoe as we go through. So as we have seen already, domestic violence offences in the borough, this chart shows for the last 3 years. So the green line shows what the offence levels have been like for 2021. At the early part of the year, during the first lockdown in April, May, we saw some level of increase on the borough. And then this reverted back to the seasonal trend that we tend to see during sort of July to August time. We saw a second uplift in offences in October, which was slightly earlier than the peak that we saw in the previous year during November. This was prior to the 3-tier system being introduced. Figures for the last 4 months are sort of within anticipated levels when we compare them to the previous 2 years. I think there'd been a lot of publicity around an expectation that domestic violence reports may see sort of some dramatic increases. We haven't seen that as such, although as I say, we have seen those smaller peaks during the first and running up to the second lockdown. So I'm just going to hand over to Zoe, who will take you through some of the key sort of areas of work that kind of almost sit behind those figures and have helped to support victims over the last 12 months.
Thanks, Kelly. I've had real trouble with my laptop, so I'm on my phone, so bear with me. Some of the work that we've done is our independent domestic violence advisor service has continued to run through the borough during COVID, even though it's been virtual. Our IDVAs have been really good at using FaceTime and using technology as a way of talking to victims, face-to-face video call. So they've been really creative about how we talk with victims. Our multi-agency risk assessment conference, which is our high-risk domestic violence panel, that's been going ahead. And in the early lockdown, we used a police conference line call because it was secure. And then obviously as technology's moved on, we've all gone on to MS Teams, which is a secure and a preferred platform really to use. We've seen some increases in MAROC, and that was after the release, I say release, but after the first easing of lockdown. That was September when the children went back. So we saw some increases then, but they're now back to kind of roughly normal levels. And we kind of anticipate that may change now the children have gone back. And we're continuing with our delivery plan around the violence against women and girls strategy, and the board meets quarterly, and we're working through the business plan for that. And what's really come out of COVID, one of the really good things that's come out of COVID for us is we've worked with our counterparts in the other boroughs on the BCU. So my equivalent in Kingston, Richmond and Wandsworth, we meet probably every 2 weeks and we discuss trends, best practice, anything that's coming up, and we share that best practice between us. And one of the good things from that was around the MAROC referral forms, and we all use the same MAROC referral forms across the BCU, and the police have got one form that they can use to refer into MAROC regardless of the borough. So that was a really good thing that came out of it. The one-stop shop unfortunately had to close because we couldn't do the face-to-face work, but it's still there virtually, and people can call in on a Monday morning to the victim support number, and there is someone on duty for that Monday morning, and they also have solicitors and others on standby for a Monday morning, so they may get a call via the teleconference system they use if they've got a victim on the line but they want to talk to the solicitor at the same time. So they've been really kind of clever at using technology to keep that running remotely. We're regularly kind of monitoring the DV figures and looking at its peaks and trends, as Kelly said. Our 16 days campaign went ahead November last year, albeit virtual, which was obviously strange. We're so used to kind of meeting people face to face. But we had some really good events during that 16 days. And I think the one that stood out was the one we did with the police across the 4 BCU areas. And we had a whole learning day that was live streamed on YouTube for residents to kind of tap in and out throughout the day to see lots of the presentations. And just on the communications, obviously we've had to think slightly different around some of our communications, purely because we're not out and about giving out leaflets and contact cards. So we have used social media quite heavily. And one of the other things that we've arranged with the clinical commissioning group is about having the domestic violence poster in the vaccine centres and the test centres. And I know they're starting to filter that out. So hopefully over the next couple of days, those posters should be going up in those test centres and vaccine centres, which we know is probably one of the only places where a victim may go on their own to go and have a test or a vaccine. And we've also made sure that they've gone up in our GP surgeries, because again, that's another place that a victim can go to on their own. And like I say, we do our BCU kind of coordinators meeting, and we always have a rep from the police, from the public protection team. So we kind of work together and we look at kind of trends and what's happening, and it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. But we do try and look at the data and just what other boroughs are saying as to what might be coming our way, you know, in the next week, the next 2 weeks, and so on. I don't know if you want to go next slide, Kelly. I think for the future. So we're going to continue to kind of carry on as we are for now. I've got meetings with the victim support manager. It's victim support that manage our one-stop shop for us. I've actually got a meeting with her this week around setting a plan out on how we open up the one-stop shop safely. Obviously safe for the workers, but safe for people coming in. A good piece of news is, because we saw some of those increases in figures when the children went back in September, and we were anticipating that going forward. We've just recently put a bid into the Ministry of Justice for some money to fund another IDVA, which would boost our community IDVA service going forward for the next 12 months. And we've had confirmation that our complex needs IDVA service is also secure for the next 12 months. So kind of going forward, I'd say we're preparing for an increase, and we've got the resources to prepare for that increase. But we just won't know until it actually happens, really. And I think that's the unpredictableness, I think, of COVID. No one quite knows what's going to happen. We can predict, but we're just not quite sure. So we do have a plan going forward. We have a plan coming out of lockdown, and we do anticipate that once, you know, restrictions are relaxed and people are out and about a little bit more, that they may contact our domestic violence services more. So we are getting ready for that. And like I say, we've got a plan with victim support on how to manage that if we get it. I think that covers everything.
Okay, thank you both.
Sorry, I was just going to move on to the. Do you want me to stop here before moving on to the antisocial behaviour? Or
No, yeah, fine. Carry on with that, Kelly.
okay,
Yeah.
no problem. Okay, so the second part was to look at antisocial behaviour levels. As I said, we've already sort of seen a chart earlier on around the ASB report to the police, but this sort of demonstrates the sort of surge in ASB calls that particularly took place early on during the first lockdown in April, May, and levels have remained, albeit slightly lower for the last few months, have remained above what we would normally expect to see over the last few months. So for the 12 months to the end of February, there was in excess of 8,000 calls, which was a 101% increase on the previous 12 months. Looking at figures also for our sort of neighbouring boroughs, they have also seen some quite significant increases as well. So putting that into context for what the Safer Merton team do, we too have also seen quite significant increases in antisocial complaints that have come through to the team. In the 11 months of this financial year, they've received an additional 425 reports compared to the whole of the previous financial year, so an increase of 38%. The first lockdown, so between April and June 2020, saw there's been sort of a shift in the types of complaints that have come through to the team. So early on, there were a lot of reports of COVID breaches, of social distancing breaches that were coming through to the team, as well as a small amount of sort of increase in noise nuisance, both within in people's properties, but also in those outside areas. During the second lockdown, so from December to February, the public seemed to be more aware of how to report COVID breaches to the police. And so a lot of the complaints that the team have seen have been more towards the noise nuisance, particularly with homeschooling going on, but residents within their properties and not sort of venturing out as much. So that just the general noise nuisance of sort of everyday living and those types of complaints, some of which the team are able to support and help through the writing of letters if required to try and sort of alleviate some of the problems. However, some of the noise nuisance calls are not necessarily within the remit of the team, so do work with environmental services when required. So some of the work that the team have been doing during the last 12 months is, as we brought to the group about 12 months ago, is the work to improve the enforcement and intelligence around the public space protection order that went live in October. And now that we're 12 months on from when the initial data was collected for that PSPO, we're now reviewing that data and looking to see if there has been a shift in location, whether there needs to be any amendments to that boundary. And so that work is ongoing at the moment. The ASB team within Safe and Merton have been providing direct support to victims of ASB and investigating cases when they come through to them. It's important to add that when we look at the sort of total number of cases, some cases may be very quick to resolve. Other cases may take quite considerable partnership input to try and resolve the problems that the residents are facing. So using enforcement when necessary, but also engagement is very key as well in terms of resolving some of the issues that come through. The community MARIC, which deals with high risk ASB related cases, has continued to meet during COVID. And Safe and Merton has continued to respond to community triggers when they have met the threshold, and they have called the meetings when necessary. There's also been continued partnership working with the Ross Leapers team to try and address particular issues in the town centre, and our ASB officers are very much involved in that working group and working with partner agencies to address that. And through our locations board, where a lot of our sort of persistent ASB related issues are raised and discussed, and we've now set up a number of area-based action plans. We have one for Mitcham, we have one for Wimbledon, and one is starting to be developed for Morden as well, and other particular hotspot areas that emerge on the borough. And this is just to ensure that as a partnership, we're really focusing on what the cause of the problem is and doing some problem solving work. So there might be a multitude of issues, from street lighting to fly tipping, as well as groups loitering around. So the problems can be multifaceted, and it's just making sure that all the necessary partners are involved. That meeting takes place every 2 months, but obviously a lot of work goes on from the team and partners in between those meetings. So in terms of future antisocial behaviour work, like with all the different crime types, but particularly for antisocial behaviour, as we've seen such high increases over the last 12 months, is to continue to monitor that closely, and particularly monitor the demand upon the service as the restrictions begin to ease and there are more public out on the streets and in public areas. I think what's key for the team is to ensure a consistent and balanced approach to engagement and enforcement of the PSPO powers. And we're obviously linking very closely with the police and Kingdom around that, but also linking in with our drug and alcohol services and ensuring that sort of the engagement is a key element to that. As I mentioned, the locations board is really key in ensuring that we have that multi-agency approach to persistent ASB issues. Whilst we'll have the specific casework that will be done by the team, the locations board is really that opportunity to work together to try and address some of those more persistent sort of area-based issues. And the team will continue to investigate the reported cases, supporting victims, and looking to use the powers that are available to them as and when required. And I guess the key thing for us is keeping our communities and victims informed of the action taken to address antisocial behaviour. So making sure that communication is fed back. And as part of our sort of strategic assessment work for this year, we'll be going out to public consultation, so trying to seek those views of the community so that we ensure that their views and what's important to them is fed through into the work that we do going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Zoe. I should have said to members actually that we're grateful to both Kelly and Zoe to Kath James for stepping in here, because normally this report would have come to us from Kiran Vargawal, who is unfortunately off ill, has been ill for quite a while. But I was very keen we should have a report, particularly taking the opportunity of the Chief Superintendent being with us to bring the two threads together. Can I ask, I just want to go back to the domestic violence element. Kelly, you said that was within expectations on trend, and yet when I look at the police data, what does stand out is that all the numbers are looking good. You know, all the crimes are down, detection rates are up, with the singular exception of domestic violence, which is up. Admittedly, it's only 5%, but it does stand out as the only crime that's not falling there. So, can I ask you to sort of cross compare there and tell us what's happening, how we can explain that anomaly?
Yeah, I think it was for the last 4 months of that period, we were seeing levels coming back to what we had seen over the previous 2 years. I mean, as I say, I mean, we are seeing about that 5% increase in reports. It's very difficult because these are reports that come through where people are confident to report, and we know from research that people may well experience quite a number of incidents of domestic violence before they do feel confident to come forward and report those. So it's difficult when we look at that increase as to whether that increase is due to an increase in confidence in being able to in reporting. But as Zoe's pointed out, those kind of upturns that we did see around the sort of October time may well be where children were back at school and people had the opportunity to go and seek that help that they needed.
Thank you. Let me come to Aidan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and no, thank you, Kelly and Zoe, for that presentation. It was good to see and good to understand. As the Chair has alluded to about the DSV stat, it's both a tragedy and a positive story in the sense of, as you alluded to, the confidence of women to come forward. And you've already in the presentation outlined some of the steps in terms of thinking outside the box, using vaccinations as a possible way to engage that awareness. I was also wondering, given the change in the borough's testing operations for COVID, is there, or do you think there is a possibility of rolling that out similarly, given that, from my understanding, testing kits will need to be given to those residents? So it's just another way to reach people, and just how we use, and probably also be useful to hear your opinion on that interdepartmental working to understand those opportunities, because again, that's a cracking bit of thinking on your part, and it's how we there's other things that you obviously do that we aren't necessarily aware of, and it'd be great just to give you the space to just talk about that briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I really like your idea actually of the home testing kits, and that's something I can probably talk to the CCG about. I think it's kind of bearing in mind that if we're going to have to weigh up, aren't we, that we're putting a leaflet through the door that a perpetrator could pick up, and it probably would have to be a bundle of leaflets maybe that goes in, so that actually if a perpetrator did pick up that testing kit from indoors, they could just look at it and see that there's a load of flyers and it's just, you know, all a bit of junk. But actually that's a really good suggestion, and I'm always open to suggestions. It was actually one of our it was our Merton Voluntary Skills Council that suggested the test centres for us. So I spoke with the CCG around how feasible was it, and they were really happy that they could have those posters printed out. And I think that's one of the things one of the positives that's come out of COVID. We've had to really think out the box and not rely on the traditional kind of communications. A lot of our practitioners in the field have come up with some amazing suggestions around where we could put leaflets or posters, or someone had the idea of giving out stickers for the people doing the vaccination, so they could stick the sticker on their apron. And we was kind of thinking, well, actually they're going to throw the apron away, and how are they going to remember to put another sticker back on the apron? So we're always looking at all those different ways of doing communications. I'm always open, you know, to everyone's ideas, because like you say, those sharing of ideas around how we can do things, I think, is what improves our communications out to victims. So I would definitely take the home testing kit idea away and see how feasible we can do that. But I think we do have to work, and I think the big thing, like I say, that we found was a lot of our victim survivors, the only place they were going was to the doctors or to a medical centre. And actually we saw some increases in our GPs and our medical centres do their adult safeguarding referrals, which in turn come through to us into domestic violence services. So in the early days, we spoke with the CCG around that. So that's how we strengthen those links with the CCG around domestic violence and the communications, and using their sites as a way of putting up posters and leaving out leaflets. But yes, councillor, if you've got any other brilliant ideas, please by all means drop me an email. I'm not precious. I will borrow other people's ideas.
Councillor Kohler, Paul.
Thank you. I'm not sure this is a brilliant idea, Zoe, but you know better than me, of course. But I would have thought victims of domestic violence will often go to supermarkets on their own. I would have thought getting the commercial operators posted up in the supermarkets, and perhaps all the ladies' loos in pubs when lockdown ends, areas where they feel safe and can take down a number, something like that. If we could get, you know, the businesses within Merton to take this on board, I think that would be a way. Because I think we all fear that there's a even greater amount of hidden domestic violence under lockdown, of course.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Before COVID, one of the tasks we did do was put stickers in the back of the toilet doors in all the pubs and clubs. So we put them in the boys and the girls. And we put them in all the cafes, we put them in all the changing rooms. And my plan is that once those businesses, you know, reopen and we can get into them, is to regenerate that and make sure they've still got those stickers on the back of the doors and, you know, in their premises. And I think, you know, that is one of the key things, like you say, it's people are going to go out and about, and where do we put them? And we did that, like I say, many years ago around the stickers in the pubs and clubs. It was a brilliant day out going around to all the different businesses and sticking the stickers in the back. And I have to say the businesses across Merton were brilliant. They were so welcoming, so understanding, and they were really, really keen to get involved. And I think that's one of the things we've learned is our businesses, you know, they want to help. In terms of the supermarkets, I'll just kind of raise your awareness around the Safe Spaces initiative. It started with Hestia and the UK Says No More project, which Merton signed up to. And they started with the pharmacy, so Boots, in the early days of lockdown, to say, can we use your consulting rooms as a safe space if someone walks in and they need to, you know, call the police, call a friend, call anyone because they're in danger. And that Safe Spaces project has blossomed. And we've now got, I think they've now got pretty much all the pharmacies within Boots. on board across the whole of the UK. They've got some of the Superdrug pharmacy consulting rooms, again, across the whole of the UK. I was on a webinar last week with them about it. Morrison's have signed up and they've got their premises now as a safe space. So anyone can walk into Morrison's and say to a member of staff, I need some help. And they've also put the National Domestic Violence Helpline number on the bottom of their till receipts. So next time you're in Morrison's, grab a till receipt and the National Domestic Violence number is at the bottom of the till receipt. And what they're also planning to do, and I know obviously of the tragic murder of Sarah, a lot of the other big retailers have come out and said, you know, our sites are safe places. So if you are or you feel in danger, you can come in and talk to one of our staff. But I know that you can definitely go on, I can even email it out, or you can kind of look it up. UK Says No More, Safe Spaces, and you can see all the businesses, national businesses that have signed up to it over the last 12 months. And that was something that come out from the first lockdown in April. But I can definitely send some information over to Rosie and she can pass it to you. But the other thing that the Home Office launched recently was the Ask Annie code word. Yeah, so anyone can go into the Boots pharmacies, and if they ask for Annie, that Boots member of staff knows that they're in trouble, and to kind of get them to the consulting room and work out some safety measures. And if you have a look on the Home Office website, Home Office, I think it's /Ask for Annie, there's some posters that people can put up in their retail stores. And one of the things that I'd like to do kind of coming out of lockdown, again, going around to our businesses with our stickers, but also raising the awareness with some of our smaller businesses around safe spaces and how we can get them on board locally as a safe space.
But we need some signage up in places like Morrison's, because I doubt many people know this stuff. I think could we persuade them more to put signage up?
Yes, so there should be signage. There's definitely signage in Boots. I'm sure I've seen some in Morrison's, but that's something I'll double check on our stores on Borough just to make sure that our local stores have got it. That's a really good point, Councillor. I'll definitely raise that. But no, if you are out and about, please let me know that you've seen the till receipts. But I think, there's been some really good communications and really good projects that has kind of come out of COVID. And one of them is being safe spaces.
Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for all of that. But I just want to add a few things. I'm an ex-special constable, Elizabeth might want to know, nearly 11 years with you, and a magistrate after that, obviously. So I can't join you back now, but I can help if you need me. Now, you talk about safe spaces, but where you try, somehow it eludes us, that the place of worship is a safe place for some people. And they go there, but you don't bring any or send any leaflets to the church. And we are having one of the doctors coming to my church on Sunday about vaccination, but that's only part of it. What about isolation? What about all the other things? And the courts, as a magistrate, I know the courts are not functioning as they used to function. So what are we doing to protect the people who feel closeted, alone? Well, they are with people, but they're alone because they're not communicating. And that's when everybody starts fighting for space. I don't know if we're doing anything. And another bit that I've seen in my ward, and that affects the police, I think, and Safer Neighbourhood. The parks are open, and that's really a council situation.
In 15 minutes.
The parks are wide open. And so because of that, anybody can go in anytime, and I keep getting a lot of complaints about noise and antisocial behavior, and we need lighting, which has been mentioned. And so we need to really work together, not just talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you want me to? I'll answer that first bit. So the Safe Spaces project obviously is run by Hestia as a part of a national project, and we're looking at how we can roll some of that out on a local level. In terms of the church element, it's something that we've kind of thought about for a while, and we're working with Emma at Salvation Army and Maureen at Inner Strength, and they're doing some of the work and training in the churches at the moment, and as part of that training we want to try and make sure we can get some leaflets out. I think some of the feedback we've had from just generally from our victims is they're a bit kind of online fatigue, and actually they want something they can go and pick up. So if they go into church, I want to be able to pick a leaflet up, or you know, if I go somewhere, I want to be able to pick something up rather than reading it on, you know, on my phone, on the technology. So that is something we're looking to do as part of that unlocking, should we say, that we can try and get our leaflets back out to as many places as possible. And once those restrictions start easing, we're quite conscious that people are going to go back out and about to their regular places. And it's, yeah, kind of how quick time can we get those leaflets out to the GPs, to the churches, to the community centres. It's like starting all over again, isn't it? We've been in hibernation for a long time and we need to kind of start all over again. So that is on our plan for unlocking in terms of the domestic violence. In terms of the parks, I don't know if Kath's still around and whether that's something she can answer or she can take back and get an answer around it. Are you there, Kath?
Chair, yes, I'm happy to pick that up. And yes, by all means, I will certainly take those comments back to our kind of green spaces team. I'm aware the government announced yesterday a further £45 million for additional CCTV and lighting that councils can bid into. I have to say, I did have a look this afternoon. I haven't seen any details of that fund yet, but I understand that we would be very interested in having a look at that, and then obviously having a look at the need across the borough, and we can bring that back to members in due course once we understand some more about that.
Thanks very much. Can I just we get the police officers? We used to, I'll say where I'm from, I'm Longthornton Ward, and we have 6 parks and they're open. And there have been a lot of complaints. I'm writing one, well, I was writing up one today. And if no one just wander through from time to time, it's left up to people to upset the neighbors. And it could be 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, and it's a lot of things. And I know that having worked with the police myself, people are happy to just see us wander by. And so if we could, I know you're short of staff, but something needs to be done, please.
Councillor Gretton, then I'll come to Ros.
I was just going to say I was very grateful for the work of Councillor Moulton and Wimbledon Park, because some of the lighting issues, for example, I know when the lockdown happened and all the tennis court lights went out, but there were people walking through the park in the evening and it was in total darkness. So sometimes it's just the common sense issues of making sure that the lights which are there don't all get turned off just because we go into a stage of lockdown, and also that things are maintained as well. I know that from the athletics track over to Southfields Tube Station, there's a long line of lamps, and a lot of those lights bulbs hadn't been replaced. And I know that I was contacted and a server councillors on our ward by I think the women's running group in the athletics stadium, who were just found it very dark and risky walking there at night, so we got the lights replaced. But I actually wanted to ask the Safer Merton team about the status of the probation services at the moment. I know that's a key part of the strategic partnership work of Safer Merton, and you know you see the community rehabilitation company out and about in Merton. They do such excellent work, and it's a very, very positive thing for the people involved in that to get engaged in. But their work has been very severely impacted, of course, as a matter of probation during the COVID pandemic. So what's the current, is the Safer Merton team able just to update us on probation and the community rehabilitation company at the moment in terms of what they're doing across Merton? How has that impacted, and when do you think we'll be able to see that get back to normal again?
Chair, I'm afraid I don't have that information with me this evening in terms of some of those impacts and when they're likely to return to normal, but I'm more than happy to take away Councillor Gretton's comments and to provide him with a response outside of the meeting.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Kath. Let me come to Ross Cordner now.
Thank you, Chair. This was just really following up from Councillor Fraser's suggestions around getting information into churches. Certainly in my position at the Southwark Diocesan Board of Education, we can link up with local clergy in the Church of England to help get that message through. But also schools in other boroughs have information regarding domestic violence and contact numbers in staff toilets and staff rooms, and also information held by family support workers for parents as a safe point of contact as well. So that might be another avenue to explore across your team. Thank you.
Ros, thank you for that offer. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll grab your email from Rosie, and yeah, we're definitely linking. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Good. I think unless there are further questions, I'm going to close on this and thank the Agatha. You would like to come in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you to Liz and to Zoe and Kelly and Kath for giving us all this information. I think we've got a fantastic team here. I mean, there's Violence Against Women group are very good. I mean, Zoe and they're always on the ball. And they know what's trending and what's happening. So any information they can give it to you straight away. And I know it's been such a sad issue with Sarah Everard being murdered. And what we hope to do is try and get, listen to the local, really listen to the local community, listen to the women and see what they want done and what they want us to do. I know people are scared. I mean, I'm speaking to people already. So, and they're all very keen to sort of do the same thing. So hopefully if we all put our heads together, we might be able to get somewhere a little bit further up and do great things, hopefully. So it's a very sad situation. So I just thought I'd just put that bit and thank them because they're really working very hard as well. So thank you all very much as well.
Thank you, Agatha, for that. And of course, it is the case that people's perceptions may be real, they may be false, and we do know that the chances of being attacked on the streets of London are extremely low. But once people have that fear, then their behaviour starts to respond to the fears they hold, whether they're valid or not. So that it's so important that we can provide effective reassurance. I would like to just add my thanks to Zoe, Kelly and Kath for putting the presentation together, because it was actually in some doubt as to whether the resources were there in Kieran's absence to do this, even at the end of last week. So I'm really grateful to you for taking the time to do that. Good. I will close now. Thank again, Liz, the Chief Superintendent, for joining us this evening, and I was going to say a very impressive performance, but perhaps that's sounding too much like a theatre critic. But it was great. Thank you. We're very, very confident to be in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't do it. Well, thank you. Thank you all.
And let's come now to our last item is the work programme. Planning our work programme for next year. I mean, if I can just start this off by saying we have lost our next meeting in April because of not because of COVID, because of it's PERDA, isn't it? But we lost the same meeting a year ago because of COVID. So I am concerned that there are items there, particularly the equalities strategy that we have not looked at now for 2 years. So would like to look quite critically at taking some of those forward into our first meeting of the new year into July. Other thoughts on what you want to see in the work programme now?
Chair, could I comment?
Please.
Cool. No, thanks. I mean, on your particular point, I can only speak for myself, but for my panel, I'm exploring the possibility of having an extra meeting, just to accommodate, because as you say, there are some items that we've not looked at for a wee while due to Purda and of course the pandemic. My comment was actually about what constitutes the current work programme, and just building off the excellent contribution from the Borough Commander, Zoe, Kelly, Brenda, Catherine, and Agatha, thinking it may be worth us paying a bit of attention to designing out crime and adding that to our agenda, given the fact that comments from the Borough Commander about, if we think about the timetable of all this, that the latter half of the year, with the tapering off of government support, return hopefully to normality, there may be some issues that we would want to understand a bit further. And by combining our resources and all the great work we've already heard about partnership working, we can understand that better and add more value. And it'd be great to hear if there's any support for that as well.
I can certainly see mileage in that, and it's one way we could do this would be to take it into the topic workshops and then decide how best to tackle that one, Aidan, whether by the scope of a single meeting or some more extensive review or work.
Chair, I would certainly support that.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah. And Paul, thumbs up there. Yeah, okay, you no need to unmute. Good.
Can I just ask, are we going to keep, apart from equality, what else are we keeping from this list, please? Because I actually think demographic profile should be kept.
Sorry, demographic profile of senior managers and so on.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. We didn't get very far with getting it from councillors, did we? But
no, we haven't done it yet.
No. Sorry, I'm realising, Liz, you're being incredibly polite, but I don't think you need to stay for this bit unless you really want to. So go and get yourself a big drink or whatever you're doing now. Thank you. Sorry, yeah, back on the work programme. I mean, yes, the core figures can be provided by HR.
That's fine. I just don't want it to disappear off the agenda.
No. Sure. I mean, and that's fairly easily done, actually. So, and of course, member survey results. As of right now, I've got Sweet Fanny Adams from you on the annual scrutiny survey. You will be getting tomorrow in the courier delivery a paper questionnaire like we had in the good old days, and you can take your time to fill that in and pop it back in the business reply paid envelope, because it's been one hell of a year, really, and I would like your thoughts on that. We've done some things in quite different ways. It's been
Are you saying, Peter, you've had no responses to that?
Sorry?
Are you saying you've had no responses? Because I thought I did respond.
Well, Rosie.
Chair,
go on.
We've only received one response so far, and that was from Councillor Fraser.
Ah,
I obviously didn't respond then. I
Billy,
responded
did
to
you press the
something.
wrong button or?
Who knows?
I shall fill in the paper one. I like to be able to know when it's done and put in an envelope. It's gone. It hasn't gone into flipping cloudland somewhere.
Chair, I think you might be receiving a few. The dog ate my homework, but Billy's clearly doesn't have a dog.
I do have a new dog. No, I responded online. I'm sure I did. I responded to something.
The SIL survey, maybe.
It was about scrutiny. I'll find it.
Well, Peter, you have a dog. We haven't seen him this evening, but and he hasn't eaten your homework yet.
Would you like to see him, Chair? That can be arranged, but
we all
does
love
stop
dogs
me
now,
doing
don't we?
my homework quite
Yeah.
frequently. Sorry?
We all love dogs now, don't we? But yeah. Okay. Any more thoughts on the work program at this stage? And if not, I'll thank you all and wish you a good night. Bring the meeting to a close. So,
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.
night all.